I spent my youth building something that could last, something my family could be proud of. A home, a dream, a future rooted in the land my father loved. But in one quiet afternoon, everything I had created was torn down. Not by a storm, not by strangers, by the very people I trusted most. This is the story of how I lost everything, and how I took it all back. If you've ever been betrayed by the ones who should have protected you, you're not alone. Tell me where you're watching from. Subscribe to Their Family Stories. And if this story speaks to you, please like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. I pulled into the gravel lot behind my office, expecting nothing more than the usual Monday rush. My coffee was still warm in the cup holder, and I had a full day of meetings lined up, clients to impress, floor plans to finalize. But before I even turned off the engine, I saw them. Men in hard hats, machinery humming, the sound of walls breaking. And then, dust. Thick, rising clouds of it, swallowing the familiar outline of my company's front porch. The one my father and I had built together with our own hands. The porch swing, the cedar planks, the copper roof, all gone. For a few seconds, my brain refused to catch up. My body moved before my thoughts could form. I flung the door open, ran toward the chaos. One of the workers shouted something, but I couldn't hear him over the sound of the backhoe slamming through the north wall, my conference room. I waved my arms, coughing through the debris. Stop. What are you doing? This is private property. The foreman approached, clipboard in hand, like this was just another routine demolition. You Olivia Carter? He asked, glancing up from his paper. Yes, I said, heart pounding. This is my company. What's happening here? He tilted his head, almost apologetically. I'm just following orders, ma'am. New owner gave us permission. Said this structure's being cleared for commercial redevelopment. I blinked. New owner? He handed me the document. A notarized deed. Stamped. Filed. Legal. Sold. The land was no longer under my name. It was signed by my mother. And my brother. My stomach dropped. There was no mistake. The parcel number, the address, even the survey map, they matched. It was the very ground I had built my life on. And now it belonged to someone else. Sold. Without a word to me. Sold while I was away on a business trip overseas. Sold. Like it had never been part of who I was. I'm sorry, miss. The foreman said. We've got a schedule. You'll have to step back behind the tape. Behind the tape. Behind the line. As if I didn't belong anymore. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just walked backward. One step at a time. Back to my car. Back to the silence. From the driver's seat, I watched the walls come down. The painted sign that said Eco Home Studio. Gone in a single swipe of metal. The chairs I'd chosen. The books. The light fixtures. The fireplace. The table where I once signed my first client contract. All of it, dust now. I didn't cry. Not yet. I couldn't. The grief was too sharp to leak out as tears. It sat in my chest like a stone. Immovable. Unnamed. But beneath the shock, something else was forming. A question I had spent years avoiding. Why did I always assume they would protect what I loved? Because they were family? Because they shared my blood? Because my father once held my hand on this very land, and promised it would always be mine? I sat there for almost an hour. Engine off, hands trembling in my lap. At some point, my assistant called. Then Ryan, our lead designer. I didn't answer either of them. I was staring at the end of something. But I didn't yet realize, it was also the beginning. When something breaks so suddenly, so violently, your mind tries to stitch it back together. Any thread, any reason, any memory that might explain how you got here. So as I sat in my car that day, watching the bones of my company collapse, my thoughts didn't go to lawyers or deeds or revenge. They went home. Back to the crooked porch steps of my childhood. Back to the smell of sawdust in my father's flannel shirt. Back to the rhythm of a hammer against wood. And the way my little hands tried to mimic his grip. That's where this story really begins. I was raised in the Blue Ridge foothills of North Carolina, in a house that creaked with every season change and carried the weight of generations. My father, Walter Carter, was a third-generation carpenter, gentle, quiet, and meticulous. He wasn't educated past high school, but he had hands that could shape anything into shelter. My mother, June, was nothing like him. She was sharp in every sense, her words, her expectations, even the clicking of her heels across the linoleum floor. A bookkeeper at the local bank. She valued polish and appearances. And she never quite forgave my father for choosing calloused hands over cufflinks. Then there was Jacob, my younger brother by 6 years. A charming boy, quick to smile, even quicker to disappear when work needed doing. He had a knack for escaping consequences, always somehow too young. Too overwhelmed, too sensitive, to be held accountable. My mother called him gifted. My father called him a dreamer. I called him lucky. While Jacob flitted between hobbies and moods, I stayed beside my father. Day after day, year after year, I wasn't just his shadow, I was his apprentice. By age 8, I could name every tool in his workshop. By 12, I could draw up basic blueprints. At 14, I helped him restore the porch swing that later became the centerpiece of my company lobby. "You've got his hands," people would say when they saw me at work. "But your mother's fire." It was meant as a compliment. But I knew the truth. My mother's fire burned bridges. My father's hands built them. I spent my childhood learning how to do both. Still, no matter how much I loved my father, I saw the way the world treated him. How neighbors smiled politely but never asked his opinion. How the school board overlooked him for volunteer positions. How my mother introduced him with phrases like, "He's good with tools," as if that was all he'd ever be. I understood early. Labor wasn't respected unless it came with a title. So I made myself a promise. I would take my father's gift, the skill, the integrity, the grit, and I would wrap it in credentials. I would go to school. I would become licensed. I would walk into meetings not as the daughter of a carpenter, but as a professional they couldn't ignore. And I did. I left home at 17 with a scholarship in hand and tears in my father's eyes. My mother barely looked up from her checkbook when I loaded the last box into my truck. "Be practical," she said. "Architecture doesn't guarantee anything. But it gave me something I never had before, control." College was hard. Not academically, I was driven. But emotionally, I didn't come from wealth. I didn't speak their language of summer homes and legacy internships. I worked night shifts at a diner, sketched designs during my breaks, and sent half of my tips home whenever the roof leaked or Jacob needed tutoring. Even then, I was the provider. After graduation, I could have gone anywhere, Boston, Chicago, even overseas. But I chose to come back. Back to the land my father loved. The land that held our history. When he passed unexpectedly from a heart attack 2 years later, it shattered something deep in me. He was only 61. He'd never retired. Never taken a vacation. He died with sawdust on his shoes and blueprints in his glove box. My mother cried at the funeral. But the tears felt like old guilt trying to find its way out. Jacob showed up late, left early, and asked me later if there'd be any inheritance. That was the moment I knew. If I didn't protect my father's legacy, no one would. So I did what I knew how to do. I built. I took that plot of land, the same dirt where my father taught me to lay a foundation, and I poured everything into it. My savings, my vision, my heart. Eco Home Studio wasn't just a company. It was the physical embodiment of every lesson he taught me. Build with purpose. Create with care. Never cut corners. I hired local, paid fair wages, taught interns what it meant to build something that would last, not just for profit, but for people. And for 5 years, it worked. Until one signed piece of paper, filed behind my back, erased it all. It's strange. You can survive hardship, setbacks, even failure, if they come from the outside. But when the people who shared your childhood, your holidays, your blood, when they're the ones holding the knife, it's a different kind of wound. And this one was still fresh. But the worst part? I hadn't yet begun to understand how deep the betrayal ran. Looking back, I think I believed that hard work would buy me protection. That if I poured enough of myself into something, my time, my talent, my truth, it would become sacred, untouchable, safe from greed. jealousy, and betrayal. I was wrong. But in the years before the collapse, I didn't know that yet. I was too busy building. After my father's funeral, the grief became fuel. I didn't take time off. I didn't rest. I went straight to the land he left behind, 5 acres tucked against the trees. Quiet and untouched, and I began the work. The first thing I did was clear the overgrowth myself. No crews, no machines, just me, a rented chainsaw, and hours of sweat that felt like prayer. It wasn't just land, it was memory. Every tree I trimmed felt like peeling back time. Every stump I dug out felt like freeing something buried too long. Within 6 months, I had drafted the full site plan for EcoHome Studio, a space that would blend sustainability with beauty and honor the craftsmanship my father lived by. I designed it with natural light, reclaimed wood, energy-efficient insulation, and rooms that breathed. The main building would serve as both my office and a model home. A physical promise that green design didn't have to be sterile, it could feel like warmth. Like home. I poured nearly everything I had into the project. My savings, my credit, my name on every loan. No investors, no shortcuts, just belief. While my mother rolled her eyes at the eco-nonsense, and Jacob bounced between online business schemes, I was hauling boards, managing subcontractors, and learning how to install solar panels off YouTube tutorials at 2 a.m. I lived in a trailer for the first year. No heating, no full kitchen. My shower was a garden hose with a tarp strung around it. I burned through 3 pairs of boots and almost lost a finger trying to install one of the skylights alone. But I kept going. Because in that silence, covered in sawdust, bruised and exhausted, I felt closer to my father than I had in years. When the company finally launched, it was modest. Just me, one intern from the community college, and a borrowed truck with EcoHome printed on the side in vinyl letters that peeled in the rain. But slowly, people started to notice. The Johnsons came first, an older couple wanting to downsize into something sustainable. Then a young couple expecting their first child. Then a yoga studio owner who wanted a building that felt like it could breathe. I listened. I delivered. I never missed a deadline. Word of mouth did the rest. Within 18 months, I had to hire a project manager, then a bookkeeper, then 2 junior designers. We went from 2 projects a year to 12, then 20. EcoHome wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. And yet, I was always alone at the victories. When I invited my mother to our open house, she didn't show. She called the next day to tell me the font on our flyers looked too modern. When I sent Jacob photos of our first full home build, an award-winning net zero house perched on the hillside, he replied with a thumbs-up emoji and a link to his latest podcast about crypto investing. Even when I bought them things, a new roof for Mom's house, a used SUV for Jacob after his 3rd DWI, they never asked about my work. Never set foot in the office. Never said, "We're proud of you." Instead, the calls kept coming. "Olivia, your cousin needs help with her rent. Jacob's business didn't pan out. Can you float him a loan? Mom says the utility bills are high this month." And I kept saying yes. Because saying no felt cruel, ungrateful, disloyal. I told myself I was strong enough to carry it all. The business, the bills, the legacy, the family. I wore that weight like armor. But slowly, cracks began to form. I started waking up at 3 a.m. with chest pain that wasn't medical. My hands trembled before client presentations. I skipped meals, missed birthdays, forgot what silence without pressure even felt like. One night, while reviewing blueprints alone at the office, I fell asleep at my desk. I woke up the next morning with pen marks on my cheek. And a missed call from a major investor. I remember staring at the phone screen and thinking, what's the point of building something beautiful, if no one sees you inside it? I tried to tell my mother once. I called her after work, hoping for something, maybe advice, maybe comfort. "Mom," I said, "do you ever feel like, no matter how much you do, it's never enough?" There was silence on the line. Then, "Well, you've always been dramatic, Olivia. You chose this path. You're the one who wants to be different." And just like that, I went quiet again. From the outside, people thought I had it all. Awards, clients, a custom-built studio on land soaked with legacy. But on the inside, I was cracking. And in the hairline fractures of my exhaustion, something darker was beginning to seep in, something I didn't want to name yet. I didn't know it at the time. But while I was building a home for others, my family was making plans to tear mine down. It's strange how betrayal doesn't always announce itself with thunder. Sometimes, it creeps in like a draft, subtle, cold, almost unnoticeable at first. A missing detail here, a shift in tone there. Until one day, the floor gives way beneath your feet. And you realize it wasn't solid ground at all. That's how it began for me. Just after we wrapped up our biggest contract to date, a luxury eco-retreat tucked into the Smoky Mountains, I decided to take a much-needed breath. Not a vacation, just a step away. 14 days overseas, visiting design firms in the Netherlands and Germany. Research, inspiration, rest. I left everything carefully in place. A fully staffed team, scheduled check-ins, and a project manager I trusted. What I didn't know was that, while I was abroad drafting ideas for the future, my past was being erased behind closed doors. The first clue came in the form of silence. It was the second week of my trip, and I noticed my mother hadn't responded to any of my check-ins. No reply to the photo I sent of a reclaimed wood gallery in Amsterdam. No comment on the article that featured my company in a sustainability trade journal. It wasn't unusual for her to be brief, but it was unusual for her to be silent. Then, 2 days before my flight home, I received a text from Jacob. Just one line. We handled the property thing. No worries. That's all it said. No context. No explanation. My stomach tightened. I immediately called him, but it went to voicemail. Twice. Then a third time. When I finally got through, his voice was casual, almost flippant. Oh, yeah, he said. Mom and I talked to a guy about the land, some developer. He made a solid offer. And you weren't around, so we went ahead. I froze. You what? We sold the land. Olivia. The original deed still had Dad's name on it. And since it passed to Mom after he died, well, technically, it was hers to sell. It was sitting there, and you've got the company running already. So, what's the big deal? I couldn't breathe. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Jacob added, you'll understand once you see the offer. It's good money. Mom said you'd thank us later. I didn't remember hanging up. I didn't remember the flight home. All I remember is arriving at the office 2 days later and finding orange tape strung across the property. Machinery rumbling, and men in vests waving me away like I was the trespasser. They had sold it. They had sold my company's foundation, without telling me, without warning, while I was thousands of miles away, trying to become better for a future they'd already erased. And the worst part? They didn't even think they had done anything wrong. Later that week, I sat across from my mother in her kitchen, trying to make sense of what she had done. The house still smelled like lemon oil and reheated coffee. Nothing had changed except everything. I built that company on Dad's land. I said quietly. He left it for me. She sipped her tea like we were discussing the weather. He left it to me. Olivia, legally, you never had it in your name. But we talked about it. We agreed. You assumed. She interrupted, setting her cup down. And let's be honest, sweetheart, you've been doing well, more than well. Meanwhile, Jacob's been struggling, and I'm not getting any younger. That land had value, and we did what made sense. I stared at her. That land had value? It wasn't just land. It was the soil beneath my father's boots. The workshop where I learned to sketch. The porch I rebuilt with my own hands. The foundation where I laid every brick of my identity. And she called it a resource, as if it were furniture she no longer needed. You didn't even tell me. I said, voice shaking. Her eyes narrowed. We couldn't wait for you to come home and start making it dramatic. You get so emotional about these things. It wasn't emotion, it was devastation. It was watching every sacrifice I made get cashed in like a poker chip. Jacob texted me that night. He said I was overreacting, and that I should focus on building something new. As if I hadn't already done that once, alone. As if it hadn't just been stolen from me. The paperwork was airtight. My lawyer confirmed it the next morning. The deed had passed legally to my mother after my father died. And she had the right to sell it. No fraud, no loopholes, just betrayal. Signed, stamped, and final. But what Jacob and my mother didn't realize, what they never understood, was that I hadn't just built a business. I had built an identity. One they could bulldoze physically, but never fully own. I stood outside the demolition zone one last time before the new owner fenced it off. The sign that once read Eco Home Studio lay shattered in the grass. It should have felt like the end, but something inside me whispered, it's time to rebuild. But this time, without them. The thing about losing everything? You stop fearing loss. Once the worst has already happened, there's a strange kind of freedom. Not comfort, not peace, but clarity. That week, after the land was sold, after the studio came down, after my family made it clear I was nothing more than a means to their end, I didn't scream. Or beg, or break down. I made a list. I wrote down everything that still belonged to me. Not land, not buildings, not paper trails or titles. But what was truly mine. My designs, my client list, my brand, my integrity, the trust I'd built, brick by brick, with the people who mattered, clients, employees, the community. They hadn't stolen my company. They'd only stolen the dirt it stood on. So I made a decision. I would start over. But not to prove anything to them. To reclaim something for myself. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Megan Hart. She'd been with me since the beginning. Back when I could barely afford legal help and paid her in late invoices and hand-drawn thank you notes. She picked up on the first ring. I want everything separated, I said. She didn't even ask from what. Personal and business? She asked calmly. All of it, I said. Finances, insurance, ownership, no more overlap. I want zero legal ties between me and my family. There was a long pause. Then, I've been waiting for you to say that. We got to work. Over the next 2 weeks, we dissolved the original business structure, rebranded under a new name, Carter Reclaimed, and relocated operations to a temporary rental 2 towns over. It was smaller, rougher, less ideal, but it was mine. I notified every client personally. I explained the transition without naming names. No drama, just transparency. I expected hesitation. I expected drop-offs. But one by one, they replied with the same message. Where you go, we go. That sentence did something to me. After so many years of conditional loyalty, from family who only stayed close as long as I was giving, it meant everything to be followed for who I was. Not what I provided. Ryan, my lead designer, stayed on without hesitation. So did Jasmine, our office manager, and every intern who'd ever shadowed me over the years. One of them even offered to work unpaid for the first month, until we get steady again. I declined the offer, because I would never become the kind of person who took advantage of others' generosity. The irony wasn't lost on me. We didn't have an office kitchen anymore. We made coffee in an electric kettle and poured it into mismatched mugs. I worked from a folding table. Ryan sketched with a broken tablet. Jasmine answered client calls in a space with no soundproofing. And yet, we were alive. And not just alive, we were focused. Sharp. Lean. Determined. Every day that I woke up and walked into that dusty little rental, I felt something return to me that had been gone for years. Agency. Not obligation. Not survival. Not sacrifice. Just the quiet, steady rhythm of choosing myself. But not everything was so clean-cut. My mother continued to call, at first just to check in. Then to ask when I was coming around, and eventually to inform me that Jacob had been denied for a business loan and could use some guidance. I didn't answer. Not because I hated them. Because I finally understood. Some ties aren't worth mending, not until they stop cutting you open. Then came the last straw. A letter from the developer who bought the land. Polite, formal, informing me that my father's original workshop, the small, weather-worn structure behind the office, was being torn down to make way for luxury condos. No permits, no repurposing, just demolition. That building was the last piece of him I had left. The place where I held a chisel for the first time. Where we carved my name into the side of his workbench. Where he taught me to level. To measure. To respect the grain. I stood in front of it one more time. Fingers trailing along the scarred wood. The new property owner said I could salvage anything I wanted. So I did. I took the workbench. I took the sketches. I took the cedar beam we once installed side by side. And I left the rest. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away from the ruins. Back at Carter Reclaimed, I mounted that beam across the new studio wall. It wasn't polished. It didn't match the space. It was cracked and sun-warped and raw. But it was real. Just like me. I wasn't polished anymore either. Not perfect. Not the golden child. Not the caretaker. I was someone who had been broken, and chose not to stay that way. Growth doesn't always look like rising. Sometimes, it looks like letting go of expectations, of guilt, of people you once loved without question. And sometimes, it looks like standing still, while everything that once controlled you falls away. 6 months after the last beam was salvaged, Carter Reclaimed stood on its own feet. The studio had moved into a permanent space, modest, sunlit, tucked beneath the canopy of sycamores just outside Asheville. Clients returned, new ones arrived, drawn not by flashy marketing, but by something deeper: trust, authenticity, design with soul. I worked less, but lived more. I took walks in the morning, ate real meals, laughed again, not the kind of laughter you force in boardrooms or family dinners out of obligation, but the kind that lives in your belly. The kind you feel in your spine. For the first time, I wasn't building to prove anything. I was building because it brought me joy. My father would have called that real success. Meanwhile, the noise from my family quieted, but only because their world was beginning to crumble. The developer who had bought my land defaulted on a series of unrelated properties, leading to litigation and delays. Jacob, who had used part of the sale money to invest in a wellness tech startup, lost everything within 3 months. My mother, who had quietly withdrawn most of her share and entrusted it to Jacob, was now left with nothing but regret and radio silence from her golden son. I didn't celebrate their downfall. I didn't smile when I heard. I just felt a strange kind of emptiness. Like watching a house you once lived in get condemned, not with flames or fury, but with silence and overgrowth. A quiet disintegration. One evening in early spring, I received a message. Handwritten, no return address, just 2 lines in my mother's distinct, slanted handwriting. We made mistakes. I hope there's still a way back. I read it once, then again. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't feel, but because I finally knew the difference between forgiveness and access. So I invited them to coffee. Not to dinner, not into my home, not to the new studio. Neutral ground. We met at a small cafe just off Main Street. I arrived first, sat near the window, ordered a chamomile tea, and waited. They came together. My mother looked thinner, older. The pride she once wore like a stiff jacket had softened into something else: uncertainty. Maybe. Jacob followed behind her, slower, quieter than I'd ever seen him. We exchanged greetings, polite, civil, no hugs. I let them speak first. We didn't know, my mother said, eyes darting to the table. We thought you'd be fine. You always were. Jacob added, you didn't need the land. You had everything. I nodded slowly. No, I said, I had nothing, because I gave everything to people who saw my success as theirs to take. My voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. I want to be clear. I continued, I'm not here to punish you. And I don't hate you. But things can't go back. There's no version of this where we pretend it never happened. My mother's eyes filled, but she said nothing. Going forward, I said gently, there will be boundaries. I decide what I give. I decide who enters my life. And on what terms. That's not cruelty, it's survival. For the first time in my life, I saw understanding flicker behind their eyes. Not agreement, not relief, but maybe, just maybe, respect. We parted without promises, no second chances, no hugs, but also, no anger. Just truth. And truth is where healing begins. In the months that followed, we spoke rarely, occasionally, lightly, enough to feel human, not enough to feel tied. That was all I needed. I kept building. Carter Reclaimed grew, not just in clients, but in purpose. We started mentoring young designers, especially women from rural communities like the one I came from. I told them what no one had told me. You don't have to bleed to be worthy. You don't have to carry your family on your back to be good. At home, I carved out a space of my own, one that didn't echo with old expectations. Just peace, sunlight, music, the smell of cedar from my father's old workbench, now repurposed into my kitchen island. He would have loved it. I think about him often, how he built with both hands and silence. How he taught me everything I needed to know about strength without ever raising his voice. He never said, "Take care of your family at all costs." He said, "Build something that lasts." And I finally did. Not just a company, not just a structure, but a self, solid, steady, and mine. Studio microphone closing message, CTA. If you've ever felt like your worth was measured only by what you could give. If you've ever been used in the name of loyalty or love, I hope my story reminds you. You are not selfish for choosing peace. You are not cruel for saying no. And you are not alone. Share your story in the comments. Like this video if it spoke to your journey. And subscribe to their family stories for more voices that deserve to be heard. Thank you for listening.